Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Remnants. Robert Mercer's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove home from his construction management job. The radio played quietly in the background, but his mind was elsewhere, on his son, on the upcoming parent-teacher conference, on the anniversary that loomed just 3 days away. 3 years since the fire. 3 years since Sophia had died, saving their son Dylan. The memory of that night still visited him unexpectedly. The acrid smell of smoke, the screams, the horrifying realization that their bedroom door was blocked by flames. Sophia had pushed Dylan into his arms through the narrow bathroom window before the ceiling collapsed. He'd reached for her, their fingertips brushing for one final moment before the structure gave way. "Daddy, can we have pizza tonight?" Dylan's voice snapped him back to reality as he picked him up from after-school care. The boy's blue eyes, Sophia's eyes, looked up hopefully. "Sure thing, buddy," Robert replied, running his hand through his son's sandy hair. "How was school today?" "Good. I made a rocket in art class. Mrs. Tompkins said it was the best one." Pride swelled in Robert's chest. At 6 years old, Dylan was resilient, bright, and the spitting image of his mother. Robert had done his best these past 3 years to be both parents, but there were days the weight seemed impossible to bear alone. That had been his justification when he'd met Veronica Hall at a client appreciation event 14 months ago. She was stunning, tall with auburn hair and penetrating green eyes that seemed to see right through him. She'd approached him confidently, making the first move, and Robert had been captivated by her boldness, her laughter, her seemingly authentic interest in his life and work. Their whirlwind romance had culminated in marriage just 7 months later. Too fast, his older sister Audrey had warned. Too soon, his close friend and foreman Thomas had cautioned. But Robert had been adamant. Dylan needed a mother figure, and he needed someone to share his life with. Veronica had seemed perfect, caring toward Dylan, supportive of Robert's career, and she had even signed a prenuptial agreement without hesitation. "Is Veronica home?" Dylan asked as they pulled into the driveway of their suburban craftsman home. The boy's tone was neutral, careful. "Should be," Robert replied, noticing Dylan's slight withdrawal. Lately, he'd observed a growing distance between his son and wife. When he'd asked Dylan about it, the boy had shrugged and said, "She's different when you're not there." When pressed, Dylan couldn't articulate exactly what he meant, and Robert had chalked it up to the expected adjustment period. As they entered the house, Robert called out, "We're home." His voice echoed through the space. Veronica appeared from the home office, her smile tight as she tucked her phone into her back pocket. "Hey," she said, giving Robert a quick kiss. "I didn't hear you pull up." "We're having pizza," Dylan announced, though he stayed close to Robert's side. Again, Veronica's nose wrinkled slightly. "We had that last week, Dylan. Maybe we should have something healthier." Before Robert could intervene, his phone rang. "It's the supplier for the Westlake project," he said, glancing at the screen. "I need to take this. Can you get Dylan started on his homework?" Veronica nodded, though something flashed in her eyes, annoyance, perhaps. Robert stepped outside to take the call, unaware that this ordinary Tuesday evening marked the beginning of the end of his second marriage. Inside, as he paced the back deck discussing delivery schedules, he missed the subtle shift in Veronica's demeanor as she sat with Dylan at the kitchen table. He didn't see how her posture stiffened when Dylan struggled with a math problem, or how her smile never quite reached her eyes. "Is everything okay with you and Veronica?" Thomas asked the next day at the construction site, his voice low as they inspected the foundation work. "What do you mean?" Robert looked up from the blueprints, squinting against the morning sun. Thomas shrugged, his weathered face serious beneath his hard hat. "Saw her yesterday at Riverside Plaza having lunch with some suit. Seemed pretty cozy. She has clients all over town," Robert replied dismissively. "She's a real estate agent, Thomas. Networking is part of the job." "This didn't look like networking, Rob." Thomas held his gaze steadily. "Look, I could be wrong, but the way they were leaning in, the way she touched his arm, just didn't sit right with me." Robert felt a flicker of unease, but pushed it aside. I appreciate the concern, but I trust Veronica. We're good. Yet that night, Robert found himself watching Veronica more closely as she moved around their home. She seemed distracted, checking her phone frequently, smiling at messages Robert couldn't see. When he asked about her day, her answers were vague, non-committal. As they prepared for bed, Veronica's phone chimed with a text. She grabbed it quickly, angling the screen away from him. Important client? Robert asked casually. Just Melanie about our spa day this weekend. Veronica replied smoothly, putting the phone face down on her nightstand. Later, when her breathing had deepened in sleep, Robert lay awake, Thomas's words echoing in his mind. For the first time since their marriage, a seed of doubt had been planted. Chapter 2. Suspicions. The Conway Properties development had been Robert's largest project to date, a luxury condominium complex overlooking the river. As project manager, he'd been putting in 60-hour weeks for months, trying to keep everything on schedule despite material shortages and permit delays. The stress was mounting, and home had been his sanctuary, until now. I can pick Dylan up from school today, Veronica offered one morning over coffee, not looking up from her tablet. I don't have any showings this afternoon. Robert paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. In the 8 months they'd been married, Veronica had rarely volunteered for this duty. That would be great, actually. I need to meet with the electrical contractors. No problem. She flashed a quick smile. We can have some bonding time. That afternoon, Robert found himself unable to concentrate during the meeting. Something about Veronica's sudden interest in picking up Dylan nagged at him. On impulse, he excused himself early and decided to swing by the house before Dylan's school let out. He pulled onto their street just in time to see an unfamiliar black Audi pulling out of their driveway. The driver, male, well-dressed from what Robert could glimpse, was obscured by the tinted windows. Robert slowed his truck, watching as the luxury car disappeared around the corner. Inside the house, he found Veronica in their bedroom, changing clothes. Hey, she startled, quickly buttoning her blouse. What are you doing home? Meeting ended early, Robert said, studying her flushed face. Was someone just here? Oh, that was just Preston Walsh, she said, her voice casual as she applied fresh lipstick. Potential buyer for the lakeside property. Wanted to see some comparable homes in the area. Robert nodded slowly. It was a plausible explanation. I thought you were picking up Dylan. I am, she said, checking her watch. About 20 minutes. Plenty of time. That night, after Dylan was asleep, Robert opened his laptop and searched for Preston Walsh. There were several in the area, a dentist, a college professor, a financial advisor at Meridian Wealth Management. He clicked on the latter's profile, finding a headshot of a polished man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and a confident smile. It could have been the man driving the Audi, but Robert couldn't be certain. The following days brought more inconsistencies. Veronica's showings that couldn't be verified on her agency's website. Late-night texts that she shielded from view. Perfume Robert didn't recognize. Small things that could have innocent explanations, but together formed a pattern he couldn't ignore. He considered confronting her directly, but hesitated. If he was wrong, he'd damage the trust in their marriage. If he was right, he needed evidence, not suspicions. Daddy, why does Veronica hate Mom? Dylan asked one Saturday morning as they fished at the lake. The question so unexpected that Robert nearly dropped his rod. What? She doesn't hate Mom, buddy. Why would you think that? Dylan's small fingers fidgeted with his fishing line. She took down Mom's picture from my room. Said it was making me sad, but it wasn't. And she gets mad when I talk about Mom. A cold feeling settled in Robert's stomach. When did she take down the picture? When you were at your big meeting last week. Dylan cast his line again, his technique improving. She said I should call her Mom now. Not Veronica, but I don't want to. Is that bad? Robert carefully controlled his expression, though anger flared inside him. No, that's not bad, Dylan. You can call her whatever feels right to you. And I'll talk to Veronica about the picture. That night, after retrieving Sophia's photo from the hall closet and returning it to Dylan's room, Robert confronted Veronica. Why would you remove Sophia's picture from Dylan's room? He asked, keeping his voice level though his hands were clenched at his sides. Veronica sighed dramatically. It's not healthy, Robert. The child needs to move on. We all do. That's not your decision to make, he said firmly. Sophia was his mother. He has a right to remember her. I'm his mother now, Veronica snapped, then immediately softened her tone. I just want us to be a real family, without ghosts between us. The phrasing struck Robert as odd, almost rehearsed. Dylan says you told him to call you mom. Wouldn't that be more normal? Veronica countered. It's confusing for him, having a Veronica instead of a mother. He had a mother, Robert said quietly. She died, saving his life. Veronica's expression hardened momentarily before she stepped forward, placing her hands on his chest. I'm sorry, you're right. I overstepped. I just want to feel like I belong in this family. Robert nodded, accepting her apology outwardly, while inwardly his suspicions deepened. That night, he made a decision. The next morning, he purchased 2 small voice-activated recorders, one for his home office where Veronica often took calls, and one for her car. He told himself it was just to put his fears to rest. He told himself a trusting husband wouldn't do this. But the seed of doubt had grown into something he couldn't ignore. 3 days later, he had his answer. Chapter 3, Revelation. The recording for Veronica's car was damning. Her voice, unguarded and intimate, spoke volumes about her true character. It's all coming together. Veronica's voice purred through Robert's earbuds as he sat in his truck outside the construction site. The lawyer says if I can get primary custody of Dylan, we can push for substantial child support on top of alimony. Robert makes good money, and with the new Conway contract, we're talking 6 figures annually. What about the prenup? A male voice, smooth, educated, responded. Veronica laughed, a sound that now sent chills down Robert's spine. That only protects his assets before marriage. Besides, if the court believes he's an unfit father, the prenup becomes irrelevant. That's where you come in, Preston. Preston Walsh, the financial advisor. Thomas had been right. You really think they'll buy the unfit father angle? Preston sounded skeptical. From what you've told me, he seems pretty devoted. He works 60 hours a week, Veronica countered. And I've been documenting every time he's late for pickup, every school event he misses. Plus, I've started keeping a journal of his angry outbursts, which are fictional, I assume. Preston's tone was amused. Creative nonfiction, Veronica replied smugly. A thrown glass here, a slammed door there. Nothing too extreme, but enough to establish a pattern of volatile behavior. The court eats that stuff up. Robert felt physically ill. The conversation continued, detailing how Veronica planned to use Dylan as leverage, how she and Preston had been involved for months before her marriage to Robert, how she targeted him specifically after learning about his successful construction business. The kid's the tricky part, Veronica admitted. He's not warming up to me, and he's constantly talking about his dead mommy. Do you really need the kid? Preston asked. The alimony alone would be substantial. The child support nearly doubles the payout, Veronica explained coldly. Besides, having custody gives me more leverage. Robert would give anything for that boy. Robert shut off the recording, his hands shaking with rage and betrayal. Everything, their meeting, their romance, their marriage had been calculated. He was nothing but a mark to her, and worse, she was willing to use Dylan as a pawn. He sat paralyzed, struggling to think clearly through his anger. His first instinct was to confront her immediately, but a cooler part of his brain cautioned restraint. He needed to protect Dylan above all else. That afternoon, he called Audrey, asking if Dylan could stay with her and her husband for a few days. Then he contacted Samuel Bennett, a family law attorney recommended by a colleague who'd gone through a vicious divorce. Based on the recording, we have a strong case against any claims of unfitness, Samuel assured him after listening to portions of the evidence. But you need to be careful. Don't let on that you know anything until we have a strategy in place. For the next week, Robert lived a double life, outwardly maintaining the facade of his marriage while internally documenting every conversation, securing his financial accounts, and building his case with Samuel. He arranged for Dylan to spend extra time with Audrey, citing the intensity of the Conway project. The breaking point came sooner than he anticipated. Robert arrived home early one Friday, hoping to take Dylan to the baseball game he'd been excited about all week. The house was quiet as he entered, but he heard voices coming from Dylan's room upstairs. "Don't understand why you're being so difficult," Veronica was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "Most kids would be grateful to have a new mother." "I had a mom," Dylan's small voice replied. "She loved me. Your real mom abandoned you because you're stupid and ugly," Veronica snapped viciously. "She ran off because she couldn't stand being around you anymore." Robert froze in disbelief, then rushed up the stairs, rage blinding him. He burst into the room to find Dylan sobbing on his bed, Sophia's picture clutched to his chest, while Veronica stood over him, arms crossed. "What the hell did you just say to my son?" Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. Veronica spun around, her expression instantly transforming. "Robert, I didn't hear you come in. Dylan and I were just having a little talk about respect." "I heard what you said." Robert moved to Dylan, pulling him protectively against his side. "Get out. Get out of his room right now." "You're overreacting," Veronica started, but something in Robert's expression made her step back. "Fine. We'll discuss this later when you've calmed down." After she'd gone downstairs, Robert knelt beside Dylan, who was still crying softly. "Buddy, look at me," he said gently, wiping tears from the boy's cheeks. What Veronica said was a terrible lie. Your mom didn't abandon you. Your mom was the bravest person I've ever known. "She died in the fire," Dylan whispered. "Saving me." "That's right," Robert confirmed, his throat tight with emotion. "She loved you more than anything in this world. So much that she gave her life for you. Don't ever forget that." As Dylan's tears subsided, Robert made a decision. "Pack your backpack, buddy. You're going to stay with Aunt Audrey for a few days while I handle something important." "Is it because of what Veronica said?" Robert nodded solemnly. "Partly, but mostly because I need to make sure you're safe and happy. Can you trust me on this?" Dylan nodded, his eyes, Sophia's eyes, full of trust. After dropping Dylan at Audrey's, explaining enough that his sister understood the gravity of the situation without alarming Dylan further, Robert returned home. Veronica was waiting in the living room, a glass of wine in hand. "You're overreacting," she said before he could speak. "Kids need discipline, Robert. Dylan has been disrespectful." "Save it," Robert cut her off. "I know everything, Veronica. About Preston, about your plans for divorce and custody." Her face blanched momentarily before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have recordings," he said flatly, "of you and Preston discussing how to extort money from me through Dylan. How you've been documenting fictional abuse. How this entire marriage has been a con." Veronica's expression hardened, the pretense falling away. "You recorded me? That's illegal. Inadmissible in court." "Maybe," Robert conceded, "but I'd rather take my chances with illegal recording charges than let you anywhere near my son again." For a moment, they stared at each other, the truth finally laid bare between them. "Get out of my house," Robert said quietly. "Now, take whatever you brought into this marriage and leave. My lawyer will contact yours on Monday." Veronica laughed, though it held no humor. "You think it's that simple? I'm still legally Dylan's stepmother. I have rights. And with my documentation of your abusive behavior, plus my exemplary record as his caretaker, I like my chances in family court." The threat hung in the air, and Robert realized that the battle was just beginning. Veronica grabbed her purse and moved toward the door. "This isn't over, Robert," she said coldly. "Not by a long shot." As the door closed behind her, Robert stood alone in the home that had once been his sanctuary, now tainted by betrayal. He pulled out his phone and called Samuel. "She knows I have recordings," he explained to his attorney, "and she's threatening to proceed with her plan to seek custody." "We'll counterfile immediately," Samuel advised. "And Robert, document everything. Every interaction, every threat. This is going to get ugly before it gets better." Robert hung up and walked slowly through the house, stopping in Dylan's room. The picture of Sophia smiled up at him from the nightstand. Her last Christmas, her arms wrapped around a 3-year-old Dylan, her face radiant with joy. "I won't let her take him," Robert promised the photograph. "I won't let her hurt him again." But as he looked around the room that should have been a place of safety for his son, Robert knew that Veronica had already done damage that would take time to heal, and he suspected she was far from finished. Chapter 4. Count to Moves. She's filing for emergency temporary custody, Samuel Bennett informed Robert 3 days later, sliding the legal documents across his polished desk, alleging emotional instability and potential danger to Dylan. Robert scanned the papers, his jaw tightening as he read Veronica's affidavit, describing him as increasingly volatile, with concerning outbursts of rage and an unhealthy obsession with his deceased wife that negatively impacts the child's psychological development. "This is complete fiction," he growled. Samuel nodded grimly. "Of course it is. But family court initially errs on the side of caution when child safety is concerned. We need character witnesses, documentation of your relationship with Dylan, proof that you're a stable, loving father." Over the next 2 weeks, Robert assembled his defense. Dylan's pediatrician provided a statement confirming the boy's excellent health and Robert's consistent attendance at medical appointments. Dylan's first-grade teacher wrote about Robert's involvement in school activities despite his work schedule. Even Thomas and 3 other employees signed affidavits, describing Robert's character and work ethic. Meanwhile, Veronica's campaign escalated. She'd moved in with Preston Walsh, though her court filing strategically omitted this detail, instead claiming she'd been forced to flee the marital home due to fears for her safety. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early July, giving Robert just over a month to prepare. In that time, Veronica made multiple attempts to see Dylan, presenting herself as the concerned stepmother being maliciously separated from a child she loved. "We should allow supervised visitation," Samuel advised reluctantly. "It looks better for us if we're not obstructing the relationship." Robert objected vehemently. After what she said to him, no way in hell. 1 hour at the Family Services Center with a court-appointed supervisor, Samuel pressed. "It's strategic, Robert. We're playing a long game here." Reluctantly, Robert agreed. The visitation was scheduled for a Saturday morning. He prepared Dylan carefully, explaining that Veronica wanted to see him, but that he didn't have to talk about anything that made him uncomfortable. "Do I have to go?" Dylan asked, fidgeting with his shoelaces. "Just for a little while," Robert assured him. "I'll be waiting right outside the whole time." The Family Services Center was a bland, institutional building with motivational posters lining the hallways. Robert sat tensely in the waiting area while Dylan met with Veronica in a supervised playroom. After precisely 60 minutes, the door opened and Dylan emerged with the social worker, Miranda Oakes. Veronica followed, her expression carefully composed to convey maternal concern. "How did it go?" Robert asked Dylan quietly as the boy pressed against his side. Before Dylan could answer, Veronica interjected. "We had a wonderful time, didn't we, sweetheart? Dylan was just telling me how much he misses our special breakfasts." Dylan said nothing, his small body tense. "Ms. Hall, please direct your comments through me or the supervisor," Samuel reminded her. Veronica's attorney, Leona Parker, a sharp-featured woman known for her aggressive tactics, placed a restraining hand on her client's arm. Of course, Veronica smiled tightly. "I was simply expressing how positive our visit was." Later, in the privacy of Robert's truck, Dylan's silence broke. "She tried to make me say you get angry a lot," he confided. "She said if I told the judge you yell and break things, I could live with her and get a puppy." White-hot rage surged through Robert. "What did you tell her?" "That you don't yell or break things," Dylan said simply. "And I said I don't want a puppy if I have to live with her." Robert nodded, swallowing hard. "You did the right thing, buddy." That evening, Robert received an unexpected call from Miranda Oakes. "Mr. Mercer, I don't typically do this," she began hesitantly, "but I feel professionally obligated to inform you that during today's visitation, I observed Ms. Hall attempting to coach Dylan to make statements about your behavior." Robert's hand tightened around the phone. "Can you document that?" "I've already included it in my official report," Miranda confirmed. Additionally, when Dylan refused to corroborate her claims, I observed Ms. Hall whisper something that caused visible distress to the child. When questioned separately, Dylan reported she threatened that if he didn't cooperate, she would make sure he never saw his aunt or his mommy's picture again. "She threatened my son?" Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. "I've recommended no further unsupervised contact until a full evaluation can be conducted," Miranda continued professionally. Mr. Mercer, in my 15 years doing this work, I developed certain instincts about people. Your ex-wife concerns me. After thanking Miranda, Robert immediately called Samuel, who was cautiously optimistic about this development. It helps our case, certainly, the attorney acknowledged. But Veronica's legal team will likely argue that Dylan was coached by you to reject her. Family court is rarely as straightforward as simply proving who's telling the truth. The following week brought an unexpected complication. Preston Walsh appeared at the construction site, his Audi looking absurdly out of place among the trucks and equipment. Robert Mercer, he called, walking across the gravel in Italian leather shoes. I was hoping we could talk. Robert signaled to Thomas, who moved workers away from the area. You've got 5 minutes, he told Preston coldly. Up close, the financial advisor was exactly as his website photo suggested, polished, confident, with an expensive haircut and tailored suit. This situation has become unnecessarily adversarial. Preston began smoothly. Veronica is genuinely fond of Dylan. Cut the bullshit, Robert interrupted. I heard the recordings, remember? I know exactly how fond she is of my son. As a meal ticket. Preston's professional veneer cracked slightly. Look, things were said in private that may sound callous out of context. Like plotting to accuse me of abuse to circumvent my prenuptial agreement. Robert stepped closer, his voice low. Or maybe you mean when your girlfriend told my 6-year-old son that his dead mother abandoned him because he's stupid and ugly? Preston had the grace to look uncomfortable. I wasn't aware of that comment, and if made, it was clearly inappropriate. But dragging this through court benefits no one. Veronica is prepared to drop the custody petition in exchange for a reasonable settlement. Define reasonable, Robert said, though he had no intention of settling. Preston named a figure that made Robert laugh outright. You really think I'll pay her to go away after what she's done? Get off my construction site before I have security remove you. This isn't going away. Mercer, Preston's tone hardened. Veronica's father plays golf with Judge Williams. Her cousin works for the Department of Children's Services. You think you have support? You haven't seen what we can bring to bear. As Preston turned to leave, Robert called after him. Walsh. When the man turned, Robert continued calmly. You might want to run a background check on your girlfriend. Specifically, look into the Harrington estate in Phoenix 3 years ago. Veronica worked as the listing agent. Right before the owners reported missing jewelry worth over $50,000. The flicker of uncertainty on Preston's face was worth the bluff. There was no missing jewelry, no Harrington estate, but Preston didn't know that. As the Audi pulled away, Robert smiled grimly. Seeds of doubt could grow in any relationship. That night, Robert received a text from an unknown number. Mercer Contracting's permits for the Conway project. Interesting irregularities. Would be a shame if they were reported. Attached was a photo of the permit documentation. Robert immediately called the Conway project supervisor, who confirmed that all permits were in order. It was a bluff, but one that made clear just how far Veronica and Preston were willing to go. The next morning, Robert visited the offices of the Westlake Herald, requesting a meeting with investigative reporter Lucia Martinez. He'd seen her byline on exposés of corruption and fraud, and his instincts told him she might be interested in his story. Let me get this straight, Lucia said after hearing Robert's situation. Your wife married you to target your assets, is now falsely accusing you of abuse to circumvent a prenup, and trying to take custody of your son purely for financial gain? That's the simplified version, Robert confirmed. Lucia tapped her pen against her notepad. And you have recordings? Robert nodded. Would something like this interest you? Potentially, Lucia admitted. Particularly the family court angle. There's been concern about how easy it is to manipulate the system with false accusations. But I need to verify independently. Understand, I'm not asking for a hit piece, just a thorough investigation into the facts. As Robert left the newspaper office, he felt a grim satisfaction. He might not be able to fight Veronica's connections directly, but he could change the battlefield. Chapter 5, Escalation. Judge Diana Williams had a reputation for fairness, but as Robert sat in the preliminary hearing, He couldn't help but wonder if Preston's boast about Veronica's father's connection to her held any truth. The judge's expression remained neutral as she reviewed the affidavits from both sides. "Your Honor," Leona Parker began, her voice smooth with practiced concern, "my client has documented multiple instances of Mr. Mercer's volatile behavior. Furthermore, he has systematically alienated the child from Ms. Hall, who has been the primary caregiver while Mr. Mercer works excessive hours at his construction business." Samuel countered firmly. "Ms. Hall has been in the child's life for less than a year, Your Honor. The alleged alienation began only after Ms. Hall made deeply inappropriate and harmful statements to the child about his deceased biological mother, who died heroically saving the boy from a house fire." Judge Williams frowned. "That's a serious accusation, counselor. One supported by the child's own statement to the court-appointed supervisor," Samuel added. "Additionally, we have submitted the supervisor's report detailing Ms. Hall's attempts to coach the child to make false claims against my client." The hearing proceeded, each side presenting their evidence. Robert maintained his composure, even as Veronica dabbed at non-existent tears while describing her genuine maternal love for Dylan. As the hearing concluded, Judge Williams made her preliminary ruling. Dylan would remain primarily with Robert, with supervised visitation for Veronica once weekly pending a full trial in 30 days. Additionally, she ordered a comprehensive evaluation by a child psychologist. Outside the courtroom, Robert allowed himself a moment of relief. Veronica, however, approached with Leona by her side. "You may have won this round," she hissed, her voice low enough that only Robert could hear, "but you have no idea what's coming. Enjoy your temporary victory." That evening, Robert received a call from the Conway Properties developer expressing concern about rumors that Mercer Contracting was facing financial difficulties and potential fraud charges. The next day, 2 of his smaller clients abruptly terminated their contracts. "It's her," Robert told Samuel when they met to discuss strategy. "She's going after my business now. Can you prove it?" Samuel asked. "Not directly," Robert admitted, "but the timing is too convenient." The sabotage continued. Anonymous complaints were filed with the building inspector's office, triggering costly delays. A sudden tax audit was initiated for both his personal finances and business accounts. Most disturbingly, Dylan's school called to report that someone claiming to be Veronica had attempted to pick him up without authorization. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Samuel advised after this last incident. "I'll file a motion to expedite the trial date based on the attempted unauthorized removal of Dylan from school." Meanwhile, Lucia Martinez had been busy. She contacted Robert, requesting a meeting at a coffee shop several towns over. "I've been looking into your ex-wife," she began without preamble, "and I found some interesting patterns." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of public records showing Veronica had been briefly married twice before Robert, each time to successful professionals, each marriage lasting less than 2 years. Both ended in substantial settlements despite prenuptial agreements, Lucia explained. In the most recent case, her ex-husband agreed to pay rather than fight accusations that might damage his medical practice. "She's done this before," Robert realized, anger and validation competing in his chest. "There's more," Lucia continued. "Preston Walsh has been involved in several investment schemes that skirted regulatory rules. Nothing that resulted in charges, but enough to draw attention from the Securities Commission. I'm still digging, but there's a story here, not just about your case, but about how family court can be weaponized by bad actors." Robert leaned forward. "When do you publish?" 3 days, Lucia replied. "Just before your expedited hearing, coincidentally." The day before the hearing, the Westlake Herald published Lucia's front-page expose. "Justice for Sale? How False Accusations Can Weaponize Family Court." The article detailed multiple cases, including Robert's, without naming him directly, but providing enough detail that anyone familiar with the situation would recognize it. More damning were the patterns revealed about Veronica's previous marriages and financial settlements. That evening, Robert received a furious call from Samuel. Veronica's attorney is threatening to add defamation to their filing, claiming you orchestrated that newspaper article to influence the court. Judge Williams is not pleased. I didn't ask for the article, Robert replied truthfully. I simply provided truthful information to a reporter investigating a pattern of abuse in the family court system. The night before the hearing, as Robert was tucking Dylan into bed, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Mercer, a female voice said. This is Beverly Walsh, Preston's wife. Robert's pulse quickened. Mrs. Walsh. I wasn't aware Preston was married. Technically separated, Beverly clarified, her voice tight, though he failed to mention that when he moved in with your wife. I read the article in the Herald. I have information that might help your case. The next morning, Robert arrived at the courthouse early, meeting Beverly Walsh in the parking lot. She handed him a USB drive. Financial records, she explained. Preston has been hiding assets from our divorce proceedings, including payments to someone named Victor Dawson, who happens to work in the family court records department. I don't know what they're planning, but whatever it is, it's not above board. Robert handed the drive to Samuel, who quickly reviewed the contents. This could be crucial, he muttered. It suggests coordination to potentially manipulate court documents or proceedings. As they entered the courtroom, Robert noticed Veronica looked unusually confident despite the damaging newspaper article. She whispered something to Preston, who smirked in Robert's direction. The hearing began with Leona Parker making a motion to disqualify Judge Williams due to potential bias from media influence. When this was denied, she pivoted to introduce newly discovered evidence of Robert's unfitness, a sealed juvenile record allegedly showing violent tendencies. Samuel immediately objected. Your Honor, no such record exists. My client has no juvenile record whatsoever. Judge Williams frowned. Ms. Parker, are you claiming to have accessed sealed juvenile records through proper channels? Leona faltered momentarily. They were provided through an anonymous source concerned for the child's welfare. Obtained illegally, if they exist at all, Samuel countered. Robert caught Preston shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Victor Dawson, the court records clerk. They had fabricated evidence. Samuel requested a brief recess, during which he showed the judge Beverly Walsh's financial records indicating payments to Dawson. Judge Williams's expression turned glacial as she reviewed the documents. When court resumed, the judge's tone had noticeably hardened. Ms. Parker, I'm striking your motion to introduce the alleged juvenile records and referring this matter to the Bar Association's Ethics Committee for review. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into potential tampering with court records. The momentum shifted dramatically. Veronica's confident demeanor crumbled as her attorney attempted damage control. By the time Miranda Oakes testified about Veronica's inappropriate coaching of Dylan during their supervised visit, the outcome seemed clear. Then Samuel played his final card. Your Honor, we have evidence that Ms. Hall has made deeply disturbing statements to Dylan about his deceased mother, who died heroically saving him from a house fire. These statements constitute emotional abuse of the highest order. Robert had worn a recording device during his conversation with Dylan after the supervised visitation, capturing the boy's account of Veronica's attempts to coach him and her threats. While potentially inadmissible as direct evidence, it had led them to call Dylan's therapist, Dr. Lauren Winters, who testified that Dylan had reported the same statements to her in their sessions. In my professional opinion, Dr. Winters stated firmly, any person who would tell a child that his deceased parent abandoned him because he was stupid and ugly, particularly when that parent actually died saving the child, demonstrates profound cruelty and emotional instability that makes them unsuitable as a caregiver. The courtroom fell silent. Even Leona Parker seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Judge Williams called both attorneys to the bench for a hushed conference. When they returned to their tables, Samuel looked cautiously optimistic. The judge is offering a settlement opportunity, he murmured to Robert. Full custody to you, no visitation for Veronica, in exchange for dropping any potential criminal complaints about the falsified records. Robert considered this. He wanted Veronica punished, but his priority was Dylan's safety and well-being. What about the divorce? Standard terms per the prenup, Samuel replied. She gets nothing beyond what she brought into the marriage. Robert nodded. Accepted. As the terms were stated for the record, Robert watched Veronica's face contort with fury. She whispered frantically to Preston, who simply stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Outside the courtroom, as Robert discussed next steps with Samuel, Preston approached alone. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You've made powerful enemies today." Robert simply smiled. "Actually, Walsh, I think it is over. By the way, your wife says hello." Preston's face paled as he realized the source of the financial records. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Veronica calling after him in confusion. Victory tasted sweet, but Robert knew the damage to Dylan would take time to heal. As they drove home from the courthouse, the boy was unusually quiet. "Is Veronica ever coming back?" he finally asked. "No, buddy," Robert assured him. "She's not part of our family anymore." Dylan nodded slowly. "Good. She made up lies about Mom." "I know," Robert replied, his throat tight. "But you and I both know the truth, right? About how brave your mom was, how much she loved you." "Yeah," Dylan said, his small voice growing stronger. "Mom's a hero." Chapter 6, Counter-Strike. "Absolutely not," Robert said firmly to Samuel Bennett across the polished conference table. "I won't agree to any settlement that includes visitation rights." 2 weeks had passed since the courthouse victory, but the legal battles continued. Veronica had filed another motion, this time claiming she had developed a maternal bond with Dylan that should be legally protected despite the divorce. "It's a delaying tactic," Samuel explained patiently. "She's trying to drain you financially. Each motion, each hearing costs money. She knows that." Robert's jaw tightened. "Then we counterfile. I want a restraining order based on emotional abuse. I want her name completely removed from any school or medical documentation as an emergency contact." The weeks following the custody hearing had brought unexpected challenges. Veronica had launched what could only be described as a smear campaign in their community. Rumors circulated among other parents at Dylan's school that Robert had manipulated the court proceedings. Anonymous reviews appeared online questioning Mercer Contracting's business practices. Most disturbing was the whisper campaign suggesting Robert had been responsible for the fire that killed Sophia, a particularly cruel falsehood given the night terrors he still occasionally experienced. Meanwhile, Preston Walsh had seemingly distanced himself from Veronica, especially after Beverly Walsh filed for divorce, citing his affair. But Robert remained wary, suspecting the financial advisor still had a stake in Veronica's potential settlement. The Conway project has lost 2 subcontractors due to scheduling conflicts, Thomas reported during their weekly project meeting. Word is they were approached by someone claiming we're facing bankruptcy proceedings. Robert ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. "We're ahead of schedule and under budget. Our financials are solid." "I know that, you know that," Thomas replied pragmatically, "but mud sticks, Rob. Especially when it's being thrown by someone who knows which contractors we depend on." That evening, as Robert reviewed project timelines at his kitchen table, a text arrived from an unknown number. "Parking garage behind Monroe Building. 8 p.m. Come alone if you want this to end." Robert stared at the message, instinct warning him of a trap. He called Samuel, who advised strongly against going. "This has all the hallmarks of setup. They could claim you attacked them, violated the court order, anything. But the promise of ending the ongoing harassment was tempting." After ensuring Dylan was securely with Audrey for the night, Robert drove to the parking garage, parking a block away and activating the recording app on his phone before walking to the meeting point. The garage was dimly lit and mostly empty at that hour. On the 3rd level, he found Preston Walsh leaning against his Audi, alone. "No Veronica?" Robert asked, maintaining distance. Preston shook his head. "She doesn't know I'm here. That's the point. What do you want, Walsh?" Preston straightened, his usual polished demeanor somewhat diminished. "Contrary to what you might think, I'm not interested in a prolonged legal battle. It's bad for business. Should have thought of that before you conspire to defraud me and take my son," Robert replied coldly. "Look, Veronica is..." Preston hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "She's not who I thought she was. The things she said to your son, the lengths she's willing to go, it's gone too far. You're having second thoughts now that your wife found out, and you're facing your own divorce problems?" Robert wasn't inclined to sympathy. Partly, Preston admitted, but also because Veronica is escalating in ways that concern me. She's obsessed with making you pay, literally and figuratively. She talks about Dylan as if he's a prize to be won, not a child. Robert studied the man carefully. Why tell me this? Because I want out, Preston said simply. And I'm willing to help end this if you'll agree not to pursue any further legal action against me personally. I had no idea about her previous marriage patterns until that newspaper article. What exactly are you offering? Preston reached into his jacket, extracting a thumb drive. Recordings of Veronica discussing plans to fabricate evidence against you. Emails where she admits the abuse claims were false. And documentation of how she's been sabotaging your business contacts. Robert made no move to take it. Why would you record those conversations? Insurance, Preston said with a hint of his former smoothness. I'm a financial advisor, Mercer. I hedge my bets. After a moment's hesitation, Robert took the drive. This doesn't make us even, Walsh. Not by a long shot. I don't expect it to, Preston replied. But it should give you what you need to end this for good. As Robert turned to leave, Preston added, one more thing. Be careful around Veronica. When I said she's escalating, I meant it. She talks about you with a level of hatred that's concerning. The custody fight isn't about Dylan for her anymore. It's about hurting you. The warning lingered in Robert's mind as he drove to Samuel's office to review the contents of the drive. The attorney was skeptical until they began reviewing the files. This is comprehensive, Samuel said, his eyes widening as they went through email after email. She explicitly discusses fabricating abuse claims, bribing the court clerk. There's even communication with someone about interfering with your business contracts. Robert's attention caught on a specific email exchange between Veronica and an unknown contact discussing how to make the fire issue resurface in a way that raises questions. The deliberate attempt to weaponize Sophia's death and Dylan's trauma ignited a cold fury within him. Can we use these in court? He asked. Samuel nodded slowly. They appear to be authentic. Obtained dubiously, perhaps, but given the content and their relevance to ongoing litigation, I believe we can introduce them. Robert leaned back in his chair, a plan forming. I don't want to just win in court, Samuel. I want this finished completely and permanently. The attorney raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? 2 days later, Robert received another text from Veronica herself. Meet me at Riverview Park, 7 p.m. Just talk, no lawyers. For Dylan's sake. This time, Robert agreed immediately, but not without preparation. He contacted both Samuel and Lucia Martinez, arranging for them to be present but unseen. He also wore the same recording device he'd used previously. Riverview Park was quiet that evening, golden hour painting the trees and walking paths in warm light. Veronica sat on a bench overlooking the water, her posture perfect as always, though Robert noted she looked tired, the polish somewhat diminished. Thank you for coming, she said as he approached, her tone conciliatory. I thought it was time we talked directly, without the lawyers inflaming everything. Robert remained standing, keeping a careful distance. What's on your mind, Veronica? I've been reflecting on my behavior, she began, her voice taking on the practiced contrition he'd once found sincere. The things I said to Dylan were inexcusable. I was frustrated, feeling shut out, but that's no excuse for hurting a child. Robert said nothing, waiting. I'm not asking for joint custody anymore, Veronica continued. I realize that's not in Dylan's best interest right now, but I'm asking for some form of visitation, eventually, a chance to make amends. Why the change of heart? Robert asked neutrally. Veronica's eyes glistened with carefully manufactured tears. I've lost so much, my marriage, my reputation. Preston left, did you know that? Said the situation had become too messy. The legal fees are draining me. I just want this conflict to end. For a brief moment, Robert almost believed her. Then he remembered the emails plotting to use Sophia's death against him. The cruel lies told to Dylan. The systematic attempt to destroy his business and reputation. I have a counter-proposal, he said evenly. You sign away all parental rights or claims to Dylan. You agree to never contact him or me again. You issue a public statement retracting all allegations against me and my business. In return, I won't file criminal charges for the fraud, perjury, and conspiracy documented in the emails Preston gave me. Veronica's expression froze, the tears instantly drying. What emails? The ones where you discuss fabricating evidence, bribing court officials, planning to use my first wife's death to manipulate public opinion. Each word was delivered with precision. Preston decided to save himself, Veronica. He gave me everything. You're bluffing, she said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Judge for yourself. Robert took out his phone, pulling up on the emails. Here's you discussing with someone named VD, I assume Victor Dawson, about accessing sealed records to create a fictional juvenile history for me. As Veronica read the screen, her face paled. Those were private communications, which document conspiracy to commit fraud, Robert countered. I've already shared them with the prosecutor's office. They've expressed significant interest, especially regarding the court record tampering. Veronica's demeanor transformed, the mask of contrition falling away completely. You think you've won? You've taken everything from me, Robert. My future security, my reputation. You did that to yourself when you targeted me and my son, Robert interrupted. You were never the victim here, Veronica. You were the predator. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. And what about your precious construction company? One call to the state licensing board about those irregular permits for the Conway project. There are no irregular permits. Robert cut her off. That was a bluff, just like your abuse allegations. The difference is, I have actual evidence of your criminal behavior. For a moment, Veronica seemed to deflate, the full impact of her situation becoming clear. Then her expression hardened with malice. You know what, Robert? You can have your worthless company and your damaged kid. The boy is so caught up in his dead mommy, he was never going to accept me anyway. The casual cruelty confirmed everything Robert needed to know about her character. Without another word, he turned to walk away. This isn't over. Veronica called after him, rising from the bench. You think you're untouchable because you have a few emails? I still have friends in this town. I can still make your life hell. Robert stopped and turned back. Actually, Veronica, it is over. You might want to look behind you. Veronica spun around to find Lucia Martinez emerging from behind a nearby tree, recorder in hand. A park security officer stood nearby, having heard her threats. Ms. Hall, Lucia said professionally. I'm Lucia Martinez from the Westlake Herald. Would you care to elaborate on your statements regarding fabricating evidence and making false accusations? Or perhaps your comments about Dylan Mercer, whom you recently claimed in court to care for deeply. The color drained from Veronica's face as she realized the entire exchange had been recorded. With a final venomous glare at Robert, she stalked away, ignoring Lucia's continued questions. Think you got what you needed? Robert asked the reporter once Veronica was out of earshot. Lucia nodded, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. More than enough for a follow-up piece on how false accusations in custody battles hurt real victims. Your ex-wife just became the cautionary tale of the year. As Robert drove home that evening, he felt the first real sense of relief since the nightmare began. With Preston's evidence and Veronica's damning statements on record, the legal battle was effectively over. His business reputation could be restored. Most importantly, Dylan was safe. Yet a lingering unease remained. Veronica's parting threats seemed more than just the ranting of a defeated opponent. Robert had the unsettling feeling that she wasn't finished, that her hatred had transformed into something more dangerous than a legal threat. As he pulled into his driveway, his phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. You destroyed the wrong woman, Mercer. Sleep tight. He stared at the message, a cold certainty settling in his gut. The courtroom battle might be won, but the war wasn't over. Chapter 7. Confrontation. The text messages came at odd hours of the night. Anonymous calls rang his phone at 3 a.m., only to disconnect when answered. Twice, Robert returned home to find his front door unlocked, though nothing was taken or disturbed, just a subtle message that his sanctuary wasn't secure. She's trying to intimidate you, Samuel advised when Robert shared his concerns. Document everything, but don't engage. The restraining order is in place, and any direct contact from her would violate it. Robert took additional precautions. He installed a comprehensive security system with cameras covering every approach to the house. He changed the locks and added reinforced door frames. He altered his and Dylan's routines, taking different routes to school and work. The Conway project was back on track after Robert had personally visited each subcontractor, showing them the newspaper attractions and updated court documents clearing his company's name. Thomas had been invaluable during this time, maintaining job site operations while Robert dealt with the legal aftermath. "How's the little man doing?" Thomas asked one afternoon as they walked the Conway site, inspecting the newly poured foundation. "Better," Robert replied, genuine relief in his voice. "The nightmares have mostly stopped. His therapist says he's processing everything well, all things considered." "Kids are resilient," Thomas nodded, "especially with the right support." A month passed without incident, and Robert began to hope that Veronica had given up. The divorce was finalized with terms entirely in his favor. The criminal investigation into the falsified court documents was proceeding, though slowly. Life was beginning to resume its normal rhythm. Then came the morning of Dylan's school play, a simple production where his class was performing a story they'd written themselves. Dylan had been practicing his lines for weeks, proudly playing the role of a brave knight. Robert sat in the audience of parents, phone set to silent, watching his son take the stage with a mixture of pride and wistfulness, wishing Sophia could have seen this moment. The children performed with endearing enthusiasm, forgetting lines and giggling through scenes. As the play concluded to applause, Robert stood to take photos and froze. In the back row of the auditorium, partially obscured but unmistakable, sat Veronica. Their eyes met across the room, and she smiled coldly before slipping out the side exit. A violation of the restraining order. Deliberate, calculated, and clearly meant to unsettle him. Robert immediately notified the school administration and called Samuel, who advised him to file a police report. The responding officer took his statement, but seemed unimpressed by what could be dismissed as a coincidence. "Unless she approached you or Dylan directly, sir, it's going to be difficult to prove intent," the officer explained. "We'll document the incident, but without witnesses confirming her identity." That evening, as Robert tucked Dylan into bed, his son asked a question that sent ice through his veins. "Dad, why was Veronica watching me at recess yesterday?" Robert stilled. "What do you mean, buddy?" "She was sitting in a car across from the playground," Dylan explained, his voice small. "I didn't tell my teacher 'cause I didn't want to get in trouble." "You wouldn't have been in trouble," Robert assured him, fighting to keep his voice calm while alarm bells rang in his head. "But next time you see her anywhere near you, tell a teacher immediately, okay?" After Dylan fell asleep, Robert placed a call to the detective assigned to the case. "She's stalking my son," he stated without preamble. "At his school, twice in 2 days." Detective Marshall Collins, a veteran officer with a reputation for thoroughness, took the new information seriously. "I'll speak with the school about their security protocols and review their visitor logs and camera footage. In the meantime, I'd suggest keeping your son home for a few days until we can ensure the school grounds are secure." The following day, Robert arranged to work remotely while Dylan had an impromptu home learning day. They were in the backyard, Robert supervising as Dylan built an elaborate fortress from sticks and rocks, when his phone rang with Detective Collins' number. "We've reviewed the security footage from the school," Collins reported. Veronica Hall was indeed on school property yesterday and the day before, in violation of the restraining order. "I've submitted a warrant request for her arrest." Relief washed through Robert. "Thank you. How long will that take?" "Judge should sign off today or tomorrow. Then it's just a matter of locating her." Collins paused, which brings me to my other finding. Ms. Hall terminated her apartment lease last week. Her current whereabouts are unknown. The implications were disturbing. Veronica had gone off the grid deliberately, yet was still appearing near Dylan, suggesting a level of planning and intent that elevated the situation from harassment to something potentially more dangerous. That night, after double-checking all doors and windows, Robert sat in the living room reviewing security camera footage on his laptop. Something caught his eye on one of the previous night's recordings, a shadow moving across the backyard at 2:17 a.m. He enhanced the image, but couldn't make out more than a vague human shape. His phone chimed with a text. "Do you know where Dylan's favorite stuffed dinosaur is? The one he can't sleep without?" "I do." Robert bolted up the stairs to Dylan's room, heart pounding. His son slept peacefully, the worn green dinosaur that had been a gift from Sophia clutched under his arm. Relief flooded him, followed immediately by cold fury. Veronica was playing psychological games, trying to make him believe she had access to Dylan even in their home. He called Detective Collins again, forwarding the text and security footage. "She's escalating," he explained, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Dylan. "The texts, the school appearances, now this. I'll expedite the warrant process," Collins promised. "In the meantime, I'll have a patrol car make regular passes by your house tonight." Robert thanked him, then made one more call to Thomas. "I need a favor," he explained. "A big one." The next morning, Robert took Dylan to Audrey's house, explaining to his sister that the situation with Veronica had intensified. "I need him somewhere unexpected while I deal with this," he told her gravely. "Somewhere she wouldn't think to look." Of course, Audrey agreed without hesitation. "We'll say it's a surprise cousin sleepover weekend. Beth will be thrilled." Her daughter was close in age to Dylan, and the two were good friends. With Dylan safely away, Robert returned home to implement the next phase of his plan. Thomas arrived with two other trusted employees from the construction crew. "We're going to make some modifications," Robert explained, laying out blueprints of his property. "And then we're going to set a trap." Over the next 12 hours, they installed additional security cameras in blind spots around the property, motion-activated lights in the darkest areas, and subtle pressure sensors along the fence line. Most importantly, they created a safe room in the master bedroom closet. Reinforced door, separate phone line, emergency supplies. "You really think she'd try to break in?" Thomas asked as they finished the installations. "I think she's obsessed and escalating," Robert replied grimly. "And I'm not taking chances with Dylan's safety." That evening, Detective Collins called with an update. "We've got the arrest warrant, but still no sign of Ms. Hall. Her credit cards haven't been used in 3 days. Her phone is turned off. It's like she's deliberately gone dark. Or she's preparing for something," Robert suggested. "That's my concern as well," Collins admitted. "We flag her information with neighboring jurisdictions and place an alert on her vehicle registration. We'll find her." But as Robert ended the call, he couldn't shake the feeling that Veronica was already closer than anyone realized. His suspicion was confirmed at midnight when a security alert pinged his phone. Motion detected in the backyard. The camera feed showed a figure moving along the tree line, staying in the shadows but moving with purpose toward the house. Robert immediately called Detective Collins, keeping his voice low though he was alone in the house. "She's here. Backyard, heading toward the rear entrance. Officers are already en route." Collins responded urgently. "ETA 4 minutes. Do not engage, Mercer. Secure yourself in the safe room we discussed." But Robert had a different plan. He moved silently through the darkened house to Dylan's empty bedroom, positioning himself out of sight but with a clear view of the door and window. If Veronica's target was his son, as he suspected, this is where she would come. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. A soft scraping sound came from the back door, the sound of someone manipulating the lock. Then silence, followed by the nearly imperceptible creak of the door opening. Robert held his position, scarcely breathing as he heard soft footsteps moving through the lower level of the house. They paused in the living room, then began ascending the stairs with deliberate slowness. A beam of light from a small flashlight swept along the hallway, stopping at Dylan's door. The knob turned slowly, and the door eased open. In the dim light, Robert could make out Veronica's silhouette as she slipped into the room. She moved directly to Dylan's bed, shining the light on the mound of pillows Robert had arranged under the covers to resemble a sleeping child. "Dylan," she whispered, her voice carrying an unsettling gentleness. "Wake up, sweetie. We're going on a special trip." When there was no response, she reached out to shake the form under the blankets. As her hand met only pillows, She yanked back the covers with a hiss of frustration. "Looking for someone?" Robert asked quietly, flipping on the bedside lamp. Veronica spun around, her face contorting with rage when she saw him. In her hand was not just a flashlight, but a hypodermic needle. "Where is he?" she demanded. "Safe," Robert replied, rising slowly from his position. "Far away from you." Veronica's laugh held no humor. "You think you've won, don't you? Taken everything from me. Made me look like a fool. Ruined my reputation." "You did that yourself," Robert countered. "None of this had to happen. All you had to do was leave my son alone. After what you did to me." Veronica's voice rose, her composure cracking. "Do you have any idea what it's like to lose everything? To be humiliated publicly? To have your entire future destroyed?" Robert noticed her grip tightening on the needle. "The police are on their way, Veronica. It's over." "Nothing's over until I say it is," she snarled, lunging toward him suddenly, the needle aimed at his chest. Robert sidestepped, grabbing her wrist and forcing it upward. The needle plunged into the wall as they grappled. Veronica fought with surprising strength, her free hand clawing at his face. "You destroyed the wrong woman," she hissed, echoing her text message as she broke free of his grip. "I wanted to take your precious son, make you feel what it's like to lose everything. But this works too." She reached into her jacket, pulling out not another needle, but a small handgun. Robert froze, calculating distances and options as she leveled it at him. "You know what's ironic?" Veronica's smile was chilling. "After I shoot you, I'll be the grieving widow. Dylan will come to me as a stepmother. I'll still get everything I wanted. My wife told my 6-year-old son from my first marriage, 'Your real won't abandon you because you're stupid and ugly.' He came to me sobbing. What she didn't know, his mother died, saving him from a fire. At family court, when she claimed to be Mother of the Year, I played her call recordings with her lover planning to get child's custody and alimony and falsely accusing me in family court." The judge's face turned to stone. The voice came from the doorway, where Detective Collins stood with his weapon trained on Veronica. He was reading from a paper, the original complaint Robert had filed. Veronica's momentary distraction was all Robert needed. He lunged forward, knocking the gun from her hand and pinning her against the wall as additional officers rushed into the room. "Veronica Hall, you're under arrest for violation of a restraining order, breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted kidnapping," Collins recited as his officers secure Veronica in handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Veronica's screams of rage echoed through the house as they led her away, her threats and accusations becoming increasingly incoherent. After giving his statement, Robert sat on the front porch with Detective Collins, the adrenaline finally beginning to subside. The needle contained a powerful sedative, Collins informed him grimly. Enough to knock out an adult, let alone a child. And the gun was loaded. "She came prepared, Mercer." Robert nodded, the full weight of how close they'd come to tragedy settling on him. "If you hadn't arrived when you did." "But we did," Collins said firmly. "Because you prepared, documented everything, and didn't try to handle it alone. That's what separates survivors from victims." As the night faded toward dawn, Robert called Audrey to check on Dylan. His son was still sleeping peacefully, unaware of how dramatically his life might have changed that night. "We got her, Audrey," he said softly. "It's really over now." Chapter 8. Reconstruction. 3 months after Veronica's arrest, Robert stood at the edge of the Conway Project's rooftop terrace, surveying the nearly completed luxury condominium complex. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. "We're 2 weeks ahead of schedule," Thomas reported, consulting his tablet. "Final inspections are set for next Thursday, and the interior designers start the model units on Monday." Robert nodded appreciatively. The team did outstanding work, especially considering the disruptions. "Yeah, well, nothing motivates construction workers like hearing their boss fought off a crazy ex with a needle and a gun," Thomas replied with a wry smile. "You're practically a legend now." The story had indeed spread, despite Robert's attempts at discretion. Lucia Martinez's follow-up article had been picked up by national outlets, framing the case as a cautionary tale about family court manipulation and the dangers of false accusations. Robert had declined all interview requests, focusing instead on rebuilding his life and business. Veronica remained in custody awaiting trial, having been denied bail due to the severity of the charges and flight risk. Preston Walsh had cooperated fully with prosecutors in exchange for immunity, providing detailed testimony about their conspiracy. The criminal case was proceeding, with a trial date set for spring. More importantly, Dylan was thriving. The initial trauma of learning about Veronica's attempt to take him had been mitigated by honest, age-appropriate explanations and consistent therapy. Robert had taken Lisa Winter's advice to heart, creating new security routines that made Dylan feel safe without making him fearful. "Dad, watch this," Dylan called from across the rooftop terrace, where he was carefully examining the architectural model of the completed complex. Robert had brought him to the site as a special treat, knowing his son's growing fascination with buildings and construction. "What view you got, buddy?" Robert asked, joining him by the model. Dylan pointed to the small figures placed around the miniature buildings. "These people are too big for the doors. They wouldn't fit in real life." Robert laughed, impressed by his son's eye for detail. "You're absolutely right. That's called scale, making sure all the parts of a model match in size. You got a good eye." Dylan beamed at the praise. "Maybe I can build buildings with you when I grow up." "Maybe you can," Robert agreed, feeling a surge of pride and affection. Mercer and Son contracting has a nice ring to it. Later that afternoon, as they drove home, Dylan asked the question Robert had been expecting for weeks. "Is Veronica going to jail forever?" Robert considered how to frame his answer. "Not forever, but for a long time. She broke some very serious laws, and there are consequences for that." Dylan nodded thoughtfully. "She was really mad at you." "Yes, she was," Robert acknowledged. "Sometimes adults get so caught up in their anger that they make terrible choices. Like telling lies about Mom." Robert glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. "Yes, exactly like that. But you know the truth about your mom, right? She was brave," Dylan said with certainty. "And she loved me a lot. More than anything in the world," Robert confirmed, his throat tightening slightly. That evening, as Dylan did homework at the kitchen table, Robert's phone rang with Samuel's number. "We've received a settlement offer from Veronica's new attorney," Samuel announced without preamble. "She's willing to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a shorter sentence recommendation." Robert tensed. "How much shorter?" "Still substantial. 5 to 7 years instead of potentially 15. The DA is inclined to accept, given the strength of the evidence and the certainty of conviction." "And what does she want from me?" Robert asked, knowing there had to be more. "A statement to the court that you don't object to the plea deal," Samuel explained. "An agreement not to pursue civil damages." Robert considered this as he watched Dylan carefully writing out spelling words, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. The thought of dragging his son through years of legal proceedings, possibly requiring him to testify about Veronica's treatment, weighed heavily. "Tell the DA I don't object," he decided, "as long as the terms include a permanent restraining order and no possibility of early release." After ending the call, Robert joined Dylan at the table, helping him with a particularly challenging word. "Dad," Dylan said suddenly, looking up with Sophia's blue eyes, "are we okay now?" The simple question carried so much weight. Robert pulled his son into a hug. "Yes, buddy, we're okay. In fact, I think we're going to be better than okay." The following week brought another significant change. Beverly Walsh, Preston's estranged wife, had referred a potential client to Mercer Contracting, a major retail development that would be their largest project to date if secured. "Beverly said you were a man of integrity," explained Harlan Donovan, the project developer, as they toured the Conway site. "Said you handled a difficult situation with grace and professionalism. That's exactly what I need in a construction manager." Robert had been surprised by Beverly's referral, considering their connection through such unpleasant circumstances. When he called to thank her, her explanation was straightforward. "We've both been deceived by people we trusted," she said matter-of-factly. "The difference is how we handled it. You protected what mattered most to you. I admire that." The conversation had turned to their respective recovery processes and Robert found himself sharing more than he'd intended about the challenges of being a single father. Beverly listened with genuine interest, offering insights from her own experience raising two now-adult children. "Would you and Dylan like to join us for dinner sometime?" she asked toward the end of the call. "My daughter's kids are close to his age. Might be nice for him to make some new friends." Robert hesitated only briefly before accepting. It wasn't a date, he told himself, just two families sharing a meal. But as he hung up, he recognized the first stirring of possibility he'd felt in months. That night, he sat on the back deck long after Dylan had gone to bed, looking up at the stars and thinking about Sophia. He could almost hear her laughing at his hesitation, urging him to move forward with his characteristic gentleness. "I'll always love you," he whispered to the night sky. "But I think it might be time to start a new chapter." As if in response, a shooting star streaked across the darkness, brief, brilliant, and beautiful in its passing. Robert smiled, feeling a sense of permission and benediction wash over him. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise. Dylan was safe, the business was thriving, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was room for new joy in their lives. Not a replacement for what was lost, but in addition to the foundation they'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Chapter 9. Rebirth. 18 months after Veronica's arrest, Dylan stood nervously in the hallway of the courthouse, fidgeting with the tie Robert had helped him put on that morning. "Do I really have to talk to the judge?" he asked, his voice small but determined. Robert knelt to meet his son's eyes. "Only if you want a buddy. The judge just wants to hear from you directly about your wishes. But if you'd rather not, that's completely okay." Today marked the final hearing in a process that had consumed much of the past year. Robert's petition to legally change Dylan's surname to include Sophia's family name, honoring his first wife's memory and heritage. What should have been a straightforward procedure had been complicated by an unexpected objection from Sophia's estranged parents, who had reappeared after years of absence, claiming a right to weigh in on decisions affecting their grandson. "I want to do it," Dylan decided, squaring his small shoulders. "I want to tell the judge myself." Robert felt a surge of pride at his son's courage. At 8 years old, Dylan had developed a quiet confidence that sometimes caught Robert by surprise, moments where he could clearly see echoes of Sophia's determination shining through. Inside the courtroom, Judge Amelia Rodriguez, a family court veteran with a reputation for prioritizing children's well-being, spoke directly to Dylan, her manner warm but respectful. "Dylan, I understand you have thoughts about your name change. Would you like to share them with me?" Dylan nodded, standing a little straighter. "I want to be Dylan Mercer Calloway, Your Honor. Calloway was my mom's name before she married my dad. She died saving me in a fire, and I want to keep her name with me always." The simple eloquence of his explanation brought unexpected tears to Robert's eyes. Across the courtroom, he noticed Sophia's parents, Harold and Eleanor Calloway, exchange glances, something softening in their previously rigid postures. Judge Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "That's a very meaningful reason, Dylan. Thank you for sharing it with me." After brief additional testimony, during which the Calloways withdrew their objection, Judge Rodriguez granted the petition. Dylan Mercer officially became Dylan Mercer Calloway, a hyphenated name that honored both sides of his heritage. Outside the courthouse, an unexpected moment of reconciliation occurred. Harold Calloway approached Robert, his expression hesitant but determined. "He has her eyes," the older man said quietly, watching as Eleanor talked with Dylan a few feet away. "And her spirit, it seems." Robert nodded. "Yes, he does." "We were wrong," Harold continued, the admission clearly difficult for him. "After Sophia died, our grief, it was easier to stay away than to see her child growing up without her. That wasn't fair to him. Or to you." "No, it wasn't," Robert agreed, not offering easy absolution, but not rejecting the overture either. "We'd like to be part of his life," Harold said. "If you're amenable, not to interfere, just to know him, to share memories of Sophia with him." Robert considered this, watching as Dylan showed Eleanor the model airplane he'd brought in his backpack. The boy deserved to know his mother's family, to have connections to Sophia beyond just his own memories and stories. "We can start slowly," he offered. Perhaps monthly visits, see how it goes. The relief on Harold's face was palpable. That's more than fair. Thank you. As they finalized their plans, Robert's phone vibrated with a text message from Beverly. Good luck today. Dinner's still on for tonight to celebrate. A smile tugged at his lips as he replied in the affirmative. What had begun as a friendly dinner between families had evolved gradually over the past year into something deeper and more meaningful. Beverly Walsh, now using her maiden name, Beverly Chun, had become an unexpected source of support and, increasingly, joy in both his and Dylan's lives. Unlike his whirlwind romance with Veronica, his relationship with Beverly had developed with deliberate slowness. She understood his caution, having emerged from her own difficult marriage with similar wariness. They had built a foundation of friendship first, allowing trust to grow organically between them. That evening, as they celebrated Dylan's name change with a dinner at Beverly's home, Robert watched his son laughing with Beverly's grandchildren, completely at ease in this extended family they were cautiously creating together. He seems happy, Beverly observed, joining Robert on the patio where he'd stepped out for a moment of reflection. He is, Robert agreed. Happier than I thought possible after everything that happened. Beverly leaned against the railing beside him, her presence comfortable and undemanding. Children are resilient when they have stability and love. You've given him both. Robert turned to look at her, this thoughtful, kind woman who had entered their lives through such unlikely circumstances. We both have. The quiet acknowledgement of what was developing between them hung in the air, neither rushing to define it further, but both recognizing its significance. Later that night, after Dylan had fallen asleep in the guest room at Beverly's house, a now regular occurrence that simplified their evening plans, Robert sat with Beverly in her living room, sharing the details of the court proceeding. The Callaways actually apologized, he explained, still somewhat surprised by the development. They want to be part of Dylan's life now. How do you feel about that? Beverly asked, her direct question typical of her straightforward approach to difficult subjects. Robert considered this carefully. Cautiously optimistic. Dylan deserves to know Sophia's family, to have that connection to her. And they seemed sincere in acknowledging their mistakes. Beverly nodded, understanding in her eyes. Second chances are sometimes worth giving, when people demonstrate they've changed. The phrase lingered between them, resonating on multiple levels. In many ways, their relationship represented second chances for both of them. An opportunity to build something authentic after betrayal had shattered their previous marriages. 2 days later, Robert received an unexpected call from Detective Collins, who had remained in occasional contact since Veronica's case concluded. Thought you should hear this from me rather than the news, Collins began, his tone professional but concerned. Veronica Hall attempted suicide in prison last night. She survived and is currently under psychiatric observation. Robert absorbed this information, surprised by the complex emotions it triggered. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a somber recognition of how thoroughly destruction could consume a person. Is there any indication why now? He asked. She's been incarcerated for over a year. Apparently, she received notification that her appeal was denied, Collins explained. Final confirmation that she'll serve her full sentence. The prison psychologist believes she'd been maintaining hope of an early release. After the call ended, Robert sat in his office at the Conway complex, which Mercer Contracting now used as their headquarters following the project's successful completion. Through the glass walls, he could see his expanded team working on designs for the Donovan retail development, which had become a springboard for the company's growth into larger commercial projects. Thomas knocked on the doorframe, interrupting his thoughts. Everything okay, boss? You look like you've seen a ghost. Robert shared the news about Veronica, watching his friend's expression shift from surprise to thoughtful consideration. Hate to say it, Thomas ventured after a moment, but it's hard to feel much sympathy after what she tried to do to you and Dylan. I know, Robert acknowledged. I don't feel sympathy exactly. Just recognition of how completely she destroyed herself in the process of trying to destroy us. There's something tragic about that level of self-destruction. Thomas nodded slowly. You always did see the bigger picture, Rob. It's what makes you good at this job, and a good father. Speaking of which, isn't today Dylan's science fair? The reminder jolted Robert back to the present. Thanks for the reminder. I'm heading out early to help him set up his display. At the elementary school gymnasium, Robert assisted Dylan with his volcano project. A classic choice, but one Dylan had enhanced with detailed research on actual volcanic behavior and a carefully constructed model showing the internal structure. As they worked together, Robert noticed Beverly arriving with her grandson Ethan, who was in Dylan's class. She waved, then approached after helping Ethan arrange his own project. "The volcano looks impressive," she complimented, admiring their handiwork. "Much more scientific than the usual baking soda explosion." Dylan beamed. "Dad helped me research real volcanoes. Did you know some eruptions can be predicted by measuring gas emissions and ground deformation?" Beverly nodded seriously. "That's fascinating. Perhaps you'll be a geologist someday. Or an architect," Dylan countered. "Or maybe both." As the children's excitement built with the arrival of more classmates and the approach of the judging, Robert found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. From the devastation of losing Sophia, through the manipulative cruelty of Veronica's deception, to this moment of ordinary joy. A father watching his son proudly present a science project, surrounded by a growing circle of supportive relationships. Beverly seemed to sense his contemplative mood. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked quietly. "Just appreciating how far we've come," Robert replied honestly. "There was a time I wasn't sure we'd ever feel normal again." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Normal changes. It evolves. What matters is finding peace within whatever becomes your new normal." As the science fair judges made their rounds, Robert stood with Beverly, watching Dylan confidently explain his volcano's features to the impressed adults. In that moment, he felt an unexpected sense of completion. Not an ending, but a circle finally closing, making space for new beginnings. That night, after Dylan had gone to bed, proudly displaying his second-place ribbon on his bookshelf, Robert sat on the back deck, looking up at the stars as had become his custom when reflecting on significant moments. His phone vibrated with a text from Beverly. "Dylan did wonderfully today. You should be proud." Robert smiled, typing back, "I am." Of him, and of how far we've come. After a moment, he added, "Would you and Ethan like to join us camping this weekend?" Dylan's been asking. Her response came quickly. "We'd love to." Ethan's already talking about teaching Dylan to fish. As Robert put down his phone, a sense of rightness settled over him. The path had been difficult, marked by devastating loss and betrayal, but it had led here, to a place where his son was thriving, his business was succeeding, and his heart was cautiously opening to new possibilities. From the ashes of betrayal, something authentic and lasting had emerged, stronger for having been tested by fire, more valuable for the struggle it had endured. Not a perfect ending, perhaps, but a genuine new beginning. Looking up at the night sky one last time, Robert whispered, "We're going to be okay, Sophia. Better than okay." And somewhere in the gentle summer breeze that stirred the leaves, he could almost hear her agreement. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.